birth, please let us know. I love the ability to know who's who and joining us.
All right, well, I think we can officially begin. Just welcome everyone. I'm Sheila Kamara, and I'm here with Debra Pascali Bonaro, and we're here to talk about how you can support women in pleasurable birth. And the two of us have put together a list of kind of our top tips, and we're going to be sharing them with you today and hoping to kind of like gift them to you all so that you can start using them with your clients and bringing it into your work so that we can really start to spread not just the message of pleasurable birth, but that action of integrating pleasure and having outcomes that feel really good to expectant moms in birth. So I think we should begin by introducing ourselves, right, Debra?
Perfect.
Why don't you go ahead?
So I am Debra Pascali Bonaro. I am a Doula trainer and Lama certified childbirth educator and have been working in birth. I always kind of like pause now. I'm going on like 34 years now of being blessed to support people in their journey from what we say maidenhood to motherhood and parenthood. And I also am the director of Orgasmic Birth, the best kept secret, and co-author of the book Orgasmic Birth, and just love kind of supporting and listening to and learning and sharing about how we can bring more pleasure, love, and joy to birth. So it's such an honor to be here and do this with you, Sheila.
Debra is one of my mentors, one of the leaders I looked up to. You know, when I was preparing for my birth, she was just coming out with her documentary. So I'm Sheila Kamara, and my work, it goes under the umbrella of Ecstatic Birth, and I really want to share with women that birth can be transformative, empowering, and deeply pleasurable. And this really came out of my own work of having my own births. You know, my first birth, I loved being pregnant and really wanted to have this kind of empowered, pleasurable birth, and I had no idea how to create that, and ended up with something way more traumatic than ecstatic. And so in my own journey with my next two children, I really learned how to integrate tools of pleasure, because at the time I was both a student and I was working at a school for pleasure in New York City known as Mama Gina's School of Womanly Arts. And when I was pregnant with my daughters, I kept thinking, wow, I wonder if I can apply all of this towards birth. And I started to do that. And what I discovered was way more pleasurable than even I had thought was possible. So even though I had been preparing for pleasure and training for pleasure, the experience that I had birthing my girls was transcended my own conception of what I knew was possible. And that made me very emotional and made me feel like I don't understand. Why didn't I know, and why doesn't everyone know what's possible? So I started sharing in my own way as an advocate for pleasurable birth, and started supporting expectant moms, women who were like I was. And I started seeing all these practitioners signing up for my stuff, and which really confused me, because I kept thinking, I don't understand, like, you're a midwife, you're a doula, you're a childbirth educator, don't you know this stuff already? And I kept hearing like a resounding no, we want this information, we want to share this with our clients. And so for the past 4 years, I've been training practitioners to do that as well, to use tools of pleasure to support themselves in their practices, so you're not also drained, because birth work, while it's extremely rewarding, can also be very draining, especially when you're seeing outcomes that are not what you would hope, and also to use tools of pleasure in supporting your clients in their births. So that's my story, and Debra and I love working together, love collaborating, because we really come at it in our own unique ways and feel like the two of us together have so much to offer. So this is one of our many forays into working together and collaborating.
Definitely. And collaboration is key, right? We each come at it from different places, and it's the combination that's just gives everybody the fullness of how to find pleasure for yourself, as you said, as individuals, and we certainly need it as doulas and midwives and birth keepers, but also how to share it. So let's start.
Yeah. So we've put together these 10 tips, and we're just going to bounce back and forth. And what I'll do is I'll also put them in the chat box so it's really clear. But why don't you go first, Debra?
Okay, so my first tip is about creating birth ambience. And I often say that we birth the way we live, and the things that we find pleasure, and the environment, the ambiance that calls us into that sacred intimacy, either by ourselves or with someone we love, is the right environment that we need to give birth. And if you're birthing at home or in a birth center, this is, much easier to create. Our hospitals, in a lot of ways, have sterilized birth. They've stripped away the joy, the pleasure, the intimacy. And so we have to work a little harder to bring that intimacy and that ambiance back. So in ambiance, one of the first things that's important is that you feel really private. So think about, what are the things, how can you create privacy in your birth space? And often that ties into the other aspects of ambiance. How do you like the lights? And you don't have to answer now, but in your own mind, think about when you want to be intimate or sacred or mindful. How does lighting impact you? And do you like fluorescent bright lights, or do you like dimness, darkness, candlelight? If you are birthing in a hospital, remember, you can't light candles though, because there's oxygen in use and you will blow the place up. But we can use electric candles, and people bring in holiday twinkle lights and just all different ways. So what is the lighting? What are the sounds? Most of us have sounds, whether it's the Amazon rainforest that we bring in on a tape, or maybe it's a certain artist or genre. And soon as you hear that music, you can just feel your body kind of get ready to move and kind of get juicy and be ready to open. So music plays a key part, or sounds, and I would encourage you to have 5 different types of sounds or music that you can bring as part of your ambiance. Smells. Do you have a certain smell, and you just smell that and you feel so good and relaxed? And I always like to joke around, I haven't met anybody yet that when I say, what's your intimate kind of smell, they say hospital. That just takes me there. So unless hospitals are really your scent for intimacy and relaxation and pleasure, you might really want to think about bringing your own smells, especially to a hospital birth. So what do we see? What do we hear? What do we smell? What do we taste? And we know that eating and drinking is really healthy in birth, and there may be certain foods at certain times that even just a taste of will bring you pleasure. And then touch, and we'll talk more about that later. But how do you integrate all the senses to create kind of this ambiance for you that really allows you to open and go deeper into yourself, into pleasure, into connection?
That's amazing. And I just want to also share that everything that Debra's sharing, it goes for you all as practitioners as well, because you want to fill the ambiance with pleasure for you as well as for the expectant mama, so you can flow through it. And that's my next tip, is using pleasure for flow. That's something I wanted to share, because a lot of expectant moms, unfortunately, like, our culture is very fear-based, right? And fear is one of the dominant emotions that comes forth in birth. And what does fear do to our body? It makes us contract. It makes us resist. So when you're in that resistance, you're actually countering your flow. You're countering your body's effort to open. You're countering the rhythm of your labor and delivery. So to go against that, you can start to consciously use pleasure to create flow, because pleasure starts to really trigger the opposite system in your body, that system of calm and connect that allows oxytocin flow, which oxytocin is the dominant hormone that governs the rhythm of labor. So oxytocin can be had through cuddling, through touch and caress, as Debra mentioned, through eye gazing. It can be had through kissing and nipple stimulation and all kinds of sensual and sexual pleasure. So when you're reaching for pleasure in the midst of birth, in the midst of a contraction, you're actually reaching for, I call it the most holistic birthing tool to create flow, because the experience of pleasure actually triggers that hormonal system that is so supportive to the flow of labor and delivery.
So beautiful. And that weaves right into, because we're already talking about flow and hormones. My tip 3 is how to enhance your hormones of pleasure. And I like to say this is loving through labor. So as Sheila said, opening to that flow, but that begins with us. And I really feel that we each need to, as caregivers, as expectant parents, to say, we have to love ourselves. It begins with us, right? So really think about, how are you going to love yourself through labor in whatever role you're in? How are you going to get your oxytocin flowing? And doulas and other caretakers know that new studies are actually showing that our oxytocin levels are going up with the laboring person, so that we know that we are connected to everyone around us. And as Sheila said, we have a very fear-based culture. Anybody can bring fear into a labor room, and our hormones are contagious. Only one person carrying fear can actually slow down a labor. And I learned this years ago working with traditional midwives in Mexico. There was a labor that wasn't moving. And at first, the midwife checked in with the woman to see if she had fear, if there was anything holding her back. And when the woman seemed really present and was really deep within the moment and was very ready to open, she looked around at all of us and said, who of you is holding it back? And that was the first time I really had people like question all of us in the room to say, are any of you holding fear? Because that's the hormone of stress, cortisol, adrenaline. So we need to make sure everyone that's with us is loving us in labor. I always say we love ourselves, then ask your partner, ask your midwife, everyone on the team, how are we going to bring more love? And also help oxytocin to flow, our own and thus yours. And as Sheila said, all those different things of intimacy, whatever turns you on in life, can turn you on in labor. But important to know that oxytocin not only helps labor go quicker and easier, it's a major pain reliever. So taking effort to find your ways to release it, there's some studies that have said it's 22 times more effective than the average like tranquilizer or mild pain medication, our own brain oxytocin, so we can get that going. We also need to know the other hormone of pleasure is beta endorphin. And some of you, Sheila and I are by New York City, and we have a few of you from there, but we have a New York marathon that is really famous. But I was just in Philadelphia. They just had a marathon. I think all of us are familiar with marathons or athletic events. And what's so amazing is that when people are in a major event, they all have a moment of kind of struggle. And I think if you've been at a marathon, you've seen those runners, we call it hitting the wall, and they really are having trouble and they need kind of people cheering them on and helping them to keep going. And then they get their beta endorphins, the runner's high. This is available to women in labor too, and beta endorphin is our hormone of pleasure. Just as when we're being intimate with ourselves or a partner, we release oxytocin, and then even more pleasure and juiciness comes when beta endorphin comes in. So we have to be willing to know that we may hit that moment of challenge, even though we're stirring our pleasure, but it is in the challenge that our body gives us even more when we feel safe and private, and we have those that are loving on us. And so really we need to encourage partners and others too to know that their role is to love more and more and find those ways that feel safe and intimate to the birthing person to open even more to their hormones of pleasure.
So good, so good. And I'm seeing so many more people have joined us on the call, Debra. So I just wanted to share with all of you that are listening that Debra and I are going through and we're sharing, our top 10 tips for supporting women in pleasurable birth. But we do have the entire second half of this call dedicated to Q&A. So if something that we're saying triggers a question or thought, just go ahead and put it right in the chat box and we'll circle back, or you can just ask it later. But I wanted to just share that so you know that we definitely do want to hear from you and do want to support you in this as well. So next tip is this idea that rebirthing with each birth. So what do I mean by that? So in a birth, there's the physical birth of the baby, there's the metaphorical birth of the mother. And then for you all as practitioners, there's this process where you yourself are rebirthing with each birth. So one of the, Dr. Christiane Northrup, who is one of the teachers in my ecstatic birth training sessions, talks about how like birth workers are attracted to the field because there's something there for them. There's something, whether it's from their own births or in their own lives, there's something that is there for you to grow and expand and blossom as a person. And that's why we're attracted to this field. And so I want you to really start to consider that not only is this baby being born, not only is there a mother being born, but that you all are going through a rebirthing process with each birth that you attend. And this is really interesting because that gets you to that place of like when you're witnessing something that makes you feel contracted, when you're witnessing something that is triggering something within yourself, you know, just as we say to our birthing moms, like, surrender to the sensation and use pleasure to allow that flow to the contractions, you can do the same for yourself. So what do I mean by this? You know, we talk a lot about like renaming contractions and having them be like something that's, you know, culturally we perceive contractions as being like a bad thing, like we have to numb them, we have to avoid them. And culturally, we're very similar with pain and emotional pain, where we numb and avoid and have all our ways of coping. However, just as for that birthing mom, like the contractions are the work that your body has to do to open, right? These contractive moments that we feel in our own bodies when we're witnessing a birth or supporting a couple or seeing something that maybe makes us feel a little bit like eek inside, those are our contractive moments. And those are moments that have gold for you to grow, to open, to expand in who your next iteration is as a woman, as a mother, as a birth worker. So I really want to encourage you all to consider that like in each birth that you're attending, you're actually rebirthing on some level yourselves.
Oh, that's so well said, Sheila. I love that too. A lot of times when I'm training doulas, I often say, I personally feel that every birth holds a mirror to my soul.
Yeah.
It really gives me that opportunity to see myself and explore so many different aspects of myself, of what's coming up, both, as you say, the positive, the negative, the light, the shadow. And so important that we talk about that. And have the tools on how to do that in a healthy way, so that whether we're the person giving birth or the person supporting or the doula or the midwife, we're all growing and we're supported in that growth in healthy ways. So my next tip is comfort and touch. And you so well touched on too that this is comfort on physical, emotional, and spiritual level. Again, so often we think so much on the physical level in birth, and we have to recognize that it's whole. And I would even add physical, emotional, spiritual, and sexual. And I know you agree with me that, Sheila, right? We have to have these 4 elements, and we have to really, in pregnancy, prepare for all 4 of them and find our comfort within that. Sometimes that does require healing or enhancing where we're at, but also as birth keepers, doulas, midwives, doctors, nurses, sometimes our own kind of buttons are pushed in these areas, and we have to have comfort within ourselves and for our clients in that. So when we talk about comfort and touch, I really want you to think about how, you know, emotionally you're going to be comfortable. What do you need that you can emotionally open to birth? And as doulas, we often check in emotionally, you know, and you want to have someone that can be that person for you, if not a doula. What's going through your mind, and making sure that whatever your emotions are, you're moving into a place of comfort. Because if we're stressed, if we're afraid, that's going to completely hold back birth. When we look at comfort and touch, there are many wonderful ways of touch and many very beautiful ways that we can actually teach people, how do you like to be touched that takes you deeper into pleasure? And you might want one kind of touch when you're talking about touch for the actual surge, the wave, the sensation. And that might be just someone literally holding your shoulders, holding your hand, where in between the kind of touch and comfort you might want might be to work out that cramp you're getting in your shoulder, or to press, somewhere else and really stroke and kind of love you up in that way. But I always like to share one comfort technique that's really simple for people to do, that is a gentle hold, is holding your hand, but holding it with intention. And there is an acupressure point called Hogu. If you're pregnant today, and I know a few of you are due soon on there, which I wanted to say congratulations. I'm excited you're joining us as you're literally preparing for your birth. But just know, if you put your thumb and forefinger together, don't press it today because it could induce labor. But those that are not, find the bump, the highest peak, and put your thumb on top, your other finger underneath, and squeeze. And if you're not in a point that's sensitive, move around often a little bit closer to the pointer bone, and there will be a very tender space that feels like bruising. And one of the things we know in finding comfort is if you create a second pain, it will take away the first one. And even if the second pain is a lot less than the first one, your brain gets tricked, part of a gate control theory, to bring your attention there. So why this might feel a little tender today, you really wouldn't notice that in labor, and it actually speeds labor, makes it easier, and you takes away all the other sensations you're feeling, which gives you now, if someone's holding your hand with Hogu, more ability to start adding more pleasure to it. So there are many other techniques, and I encourage people, many doulas and midwives know a tool chest of comfort measures. But if you're expecting, I think it's important to learn all different ways that there are pressure points, acupressure points, and other ways that can provide comfort physically, emotionally, spiritually, and sexually.
Love that. I love that there are so many little tips and tricks that are just so effective. And, along those lines, one of the things when Debra, you're talking about like sexually, I'm going to go a little bit off my tip here for a moment, because stroking the clitoris, while that might not be something everyone feels comfortable with in birth, stroking the clitoris has that same effect of like, you're taking your attention away from the pain, you're putting your attention on the pleasure, and with that pleasure, you're supporting the flow of your birth. So I that's one tip, that if you're having a more private birth or supporting someone in a more private setting, that can be really, really helpful. And the other thing with that is it creates engorgement. So when you're engorged, your body can open and spread and expand much more easily than if your tissues are not as engorged. And one way to understand that, and one way to really explain it to your clients, is thinking about a sexual experience. Like if you're having a sexual experience when you are in fear, or if you're having a sexual experience when you're not turned on, how's that going to feel? Like, youch, right? But if you're turned on, if you're engorged, if you have the ambience that Debra talked about, if you have the conditions to really honor your body and your body's processes, it's going to feel very different. It's going to feel, pleasurable as opposed to painful. So that's one way that you can really relay that to your clients, and just to understand it for yourself. That such a simple thing. Many of us do perineal massage, but just taking the focus. I'm not saying you should stroke your clients' clitorises, but they could do it for themselves, or their partners can do it for them. And it's funny, if you watch Debra's documentary, which if any of you have not seen it, you have to see it, because it's one of the most beautiful films on birth ever made. But you'll see in a few of the births that the woman's hand is instinctually, she's reaching for her baby, but it's instinctually in that area. So it's not uncommon for women to reach for their sexuality in the midst of birth, because after all, birth is a sexual act. So that's going to be my tip there, instead of what I had prepared, is like, birth is a sexual act, and to use these tools of pleasure to support your body's processes in that sexual act.
And I'm going to just keep adding, because mine was unlocking sexual energy, and you just
perfect.
so beautifully. So that's perfect. But I would just add to that to make sure that we are talking with our caregivers about this. And if you are a birth keeper, I think it's important that we are comfortable with this. I think part of hospital birth, sterilizing birth, stripped us of this ability. And, how sexy do you feel in a hospital gown, So in order to really unlock our sexual energy, sometimes it is the ambiance. It's wearing our own clothes or being naked, but it's also making sure that the other people that are there are respectful, that they understand that they're going to honor this aspect. And I so thank you so much for your words about orgasmic birth, Sheila. That means so much to me. And it is so amazing to see how often, women do end up touching themselves without even thinking about it. It just feels natural. We have all this sensation and this pressure and hopefully this engorgement going on there. So there is that pleasure. But we have one story in our book, Orgasmic Birth, where I just loved it because the midwife was willing to be vulnerable enough to share this. She was at a birth and the head was right there and getting ready to crown, and she was supporting the woman, and the woman grabbed the midwife's hand and put it right on her clit and said, "Please rub, rub, rub." And the midwife said she was really taken aback, like that's not, what a midwife would normally do. And she had this moment of thinking, do I do what I've been trained, which would be to say no and take my hand away? Or do I go with the moment of this is what this woman's actually asking me to do? And she did. She decided that the mom needed that, and it allowed her to open to a very large baby without any tearing. Now, midwives on this may be cringing, right? And I know some of her colleagues were not so happy. It does bring up a dilemma, but it also brings us back to our discomfort with sexuality often in birth. Just the two words, orgasmic and birth together, push a lot of people outside a comfort zone. So part of unlocking sexual energy is to be able to discuss this with yourself, with your partner, with other people that are going to be there, to have this opportunity. And it doesn't mean that people need to be in the room. As a doula, a lot of times when people say to me, they're going to do some masturbation or they're going to be doing a lot of intimacy with their partner, it gives me a reason to say, would you like me to give you some privacy? Because we can all also welcome a break, and privacy is often really helpful. So I'm not insinuating all our midwives should be a part of this, but I thought it was an amazing story to hear how for this woman and this midwife, they found this aspect, and afterwards they discussed it, and it felt very safe to both of them because it was truly in the moment. The woman said she never would have asked that ahead of time. Like she can't even believe she asked it in the moment. It was so in the moment and not intended. And I will add one other thing, since we're talking masturbation, and I'm having more and more people add to their toolkit vibrators. And again, as you said, Sheila, it's not for everyone. But for some people, it is a tool that in labor they found really helpful. I was at a birth where the woman clearly found that when she had a vibrator on her clitoris, she was totally in bliss. And she was loving her labor in many ways. And when she didn't, she really felt the pain. So it allowed her to feel the difference. So as we think about more comfort and more ways to open to our sexual energy, also just, think inside, what are some of your tools to open to your sexual energy in life? And make sure, if a vibrator is one of them, that you bring that to birth with you.
I love it. And I just want to say, if any of you are squirming a little or a little uncomfortable, that is so normal because, in our society and culture, everything baby related is in one corner and is pure and clean, and sexuality maybe in a different corner. And there's a lot of, the opposite around that. So societally, culturally, we have a lot of sexual healing to do. And that is true for our birthing moms. That is true for us as practitioners. And so, like, women that have been victims of sexual trauma or have maybe feelings of shame around their sexuality or anything like that could really use some sensual expansion ahead of their birth, start to heal those issues, start to really connect to your body, love the sensations in your body. And us as birth workers too, if we're feeling discomfort, think about how you relate to your own body, how you feel about your own sexuality. Think about how you feel when we say birth is a sexual act, whatever's coming up. And it's, it took me years to be able to say that out loud. And then once I did start saying it out loud, it took me a few more years to be able to say it without like inwardly cringing that everyone in the room was going to come after me, because it's so ingrained in us as a taboo, right? But it's not, our sexuality is not separate and apart from making the baby. Our birthing is not separate and apart from making the baby. It's all part of our sexuality. So you use your sexual body to make the baby, you use your sexual body to birth the baby. So one of the things that I talk about with all my clients and with all my practitioners is that you can use pleasure in two ways. So as Debra was just saying, you could reach for pleasure from the outside. Think of all your senses, use a vibrator, stroke your clitoris. These are really easy ways if you have a client that is looking for like coping tools and they're later on in their pregnancy, really easy ways to start to integrate pleasure into birth. What do you want to hear? What do you want to see? What do you want to smell? Pleasure from the outside. Sensual expansion is what I call taking the journey from the inside, learning to access pleasure from within. So our bodies are infinitely trainable, and there's also this like endless flow of pleasure that's always coursing through all of us. And it's just a matter of our attention, learning how to feel it, learning how to amplify it. And sensual expansion is an incredible healing journey when it comes to your relationship to your body and to your sexuality. So if I'm working with a woman who has the luxury of time, if she's either preconception or early on in her pregnancy, we'll do a lot of work around her sensual expansion, learning how to feel more pleasure in her body, learning how to access pleasure at will in her body. For you all as practitioners, that journey is a no-brainer. You all should be taking your own sensual expansion journeys because it's a journey that never ends. You can always feel more pleasure in your body. You can always learn to expand that pleasure, to have it be endless and rolling and access it at will. And the reason I really encourage that is because of what Debra was talking about earlier. When you're in the birthing room, that birthing field is so contagious, right? So just like somebody walking in with fear in their body can kind of trigger a stagnation in birth, somebody walking in with that flow of pleasure in birth can also trigger that in the birthing mama. So the more you are good with your own bodies, your own sexuality, the more you can access that delicious flow of pleasure in your own body and bring it into the birthing room, the more you can hold the tone for that to emerge within the birth itself.
Beautiful. And my last tip, orgasmic birth. And I have to say, building on all that you're saying, is a lot of people then just hear orgasmic birth and think all we're talking about is orgasm. And I think it's really important for me to clarify that, because when we look up the word orgasmic, it's heightened physical and emotional sensation. And so for me, every birth is orgasmic. Every birth is heightened emotion, heightened physical. And Elizabeth Davis and I defined orgasmic birth as when someone fully embraces their body and their birth, as you're talking, really can work to get into that flow and to enhance that with comfort and pleasure. So our definition is broad enough to include the people that have a birthgasm. And I do want to say there are a small percentage of people with no preparation, no clue, and they have the biggest orgasm of their life during labor or birth. We call that a birthgasm. And this happens, it makes kind of neurologic sense, as Dr. Northrup says, right? The baby's coming down and hitting the G-spot. It's giving stimulation into our vagina. It's just in the right place to stimulate orgasm for many people. And what I find is so many of the people that have had a birthgasm are shamed because we don't assume birth, and especially motherhood, could have any pleasure in it. So I have like hundreds of people that tell me that they had the best birthgasm of their life and never even told their partner. They certainly didn't tell even their best friend, or not their caregiver, doula, midwife, doctor, or nurse. So we hope Orgasmic Birth is also giving voice to the people that do have birthgasms, that I think they should be shouting it off the mountaintop, and nothing shameful to have great pleasure when you're birthing your baby in love. But for the rest of us to know that orgasmic birth should not be a performance standard. I don't want any of you running and putting birthgasm on your birth preferences and feeling like something's wrong or you failed to achieve something. But orgasmic birth is really to take the power back, for you to make the decisions of birthing where, with whom, to be surrounded by people that respect and love you, to love yourself through labor, and to experience birth to the fullest, including bringing in elements of pleasure and joy, bliss. All that is an orgasmic birth. So I believe it's available to all of us. And even if you think of every day, if we birth the way we live, there's some days that are really challenging, right? We all have hurdles. The state of the world can be challenging to many of us even right now. And I know there are some days I can feel my shoulders up here. Well, I could live the day in stress, or I have a bite of dark chocolate and I have my 3-minute orgasmic break. I turn on music that I love, and for 3 minutes, I dance like nobody's looking. I don't care what I look like, but I am shaking it all off. And that's an orgasmic moment, heightened physical, emotional sensation. So to have an orgasmic birth, you need to start living that orgasmic life and find things every day that can bring you that feeling. And then even in the middle of a really challenging birth, you can bring simple elements in. So it's not to say that it's pain-free, although I work with people that pain is not one of their descriptors. So there are people that don't, but there are people that have a very challenging, what they would describe as painful birth, but still have moments of great orgasmic joy and pleasure. So I hope all of you will kind of broaden your definition, write your own definition of orgasmic birth, and find the way that we can honor that birth was intended to hold so much more than what we give it credit for today. Our language is really bland, right? We have this really blah language about birth that's often just negative, fear, and pain. And I hope orgasmic birth is a way to help you all come back to have a full language, and a language that we each can own in our own way.
That was so good, Debra. That was so juicy and so inspiring. And someone just put in the chat box, unfortunately it doesn't have a name, it just says from iPhone, but big capital letters, tell everyone, women should know this. It would change our whole society on sex and birth. So good.
It make me cry. That was beautiful, whoever wrote that. Thank you.
Yeah, and along, just feeding off of what Debra was saying earlier about this should not be a standard that women have to achieve. So what we're doing here is we're really trying to elevate the conversation around birth, trying to elevate consciousness around birth. And it can be a tricky thing, especially when you're working with your clients, to share what's possible, but not have it be this kind of like standard that they have to achieve, because that's the last thing that we want. That's like the culture of perfectionism that we live in now, where women are constantly needing to achieve a certain standard or they're just not good enough. So that's something, one of the things I talk about is embracing the shadow side of birth, and that, you never really know what you're going to get, right? You never know how the birth is going to turn out, whether it's you or your clients. You can prepare, you can hold the space, you can have the most amazing support team, and then still something unexpected can come up, right? So how do we embrace that shadow side? How do we have it still be an orgasmic experience, an ecstatic experience, even if we're going down a path that we didn't necessarily want to go down? So one of the things is just bringing consciousness to that. I find a lot of people will not want to look at, well, what happens if you have to transfer? What happens if you have to have a C-section? What happens? All these like what ifs, they just don't want to look at it, right? Because we're living in the age of The Secret, which tells us that put your thoughts only on what you want and not what you don't want. However, the problem with this is like your fears actually live in your body. You're holding them in your body. So even if you're not giving conscious thought or attention, they're still there. So what I actually encourage people to do is let's look at those outcomes that we don't want, right? Let's look at them and take them out from under the shadows. And kind of like a little kid when they're in bed and it's dark and they see like in the corner there's that monster and you turn the light on and it's actually just a pile of clothes. It can be very similar in birth. So let's look at these undesired outcomes and let's really put some attention on, okay, am I really doing everything I can to prevent them? Am I putting myself in a situation where those things are less likely to come up? If the answer to all of those is yes, well, what if they come up anyway? What could I do to still have that C-section be the most sacred, incredible birth experience ever? And again, a lot of women will not want to look at that. They don't want to put their attention there. They don't want to put it there. But what actually happens when you do is that like dark looming fear that's residing in your body anyway kind of dissipates. And rather than having it be within, which will come up in birth potentially, these undesired outcomes just become like another outcome. Well, if I have to go down that route, it's not my first choice, but I know how to make it good. Right? So it kind of diffuses the whole thing. So really embracing the shadow side of birth, I think, is really important and something that we need to talk about. And for you all as practitioners, when you witness the shadow come up, again, just really remembering that there is a mother being born here and that you are rebirthing yourself. So in those contractive emotions around the shadow, there's gold there for you. There is something there for you that will take you to your next expansion.
Beautiful. So important, Sheila. And I love your analogy of children in the dark. Like I just really felt that in my body, how we turn the light on, right? And it is that pile of clothes, you know? And so many of those feelings about birth are the same way, right? We have to really shine a light on them and address them. And so important. And I love that you said too, we can make any birth a positive experience, right? There's so many ways that we can bring more love, dignity, and respect to any situation. I always like to add too that like we only get 50%, right? Our baby's 50%. And you have several children. I have several children. I know they don't always follow what I want. I wish it was
number one of motherhood right there.
And so I think we have to give up too, that sometimes I feel so sad when people feel like their birth didn't go the way they wanted. And I said, but your baby was 50%. And sometimes the greatest gift of motherhood we begin with is having the birth our baby wanted or needed, which may be different than ours. But having that toolkit where we've addressed it and have thoughts and ways that we can make every birth safe and satisfying is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I can say for my own first birth, having been a traumatic birth, that was the birth that put me on like a healing path, because I could not get pregnant again until I resolved what had happened there. And then once I did get pregnant, it was really all about like, I need to make sure that will never, ever happen again. And it awakened a ferocity within me. So I can look back, and I'm sure everyone on this call has had that kind of experience in their life where you went through something that was very difficult in the moment, but afterwards you're so grateful for all the gifts that it gave you. So that's part of like the metaphorical birth that also happens when you're experiencing the shadow. So we're open for questions. I think if you want to put them in the chat box or any comments there. Madeline says there should be a way to incorporate this in sex education for students in high school when learning about sex, pregnancy, and birth. Starting near the beginning can help shift out culture of sex and birth. It could help reduce women's shame in sexuality. Yes, 100%. Okay, Opal asks, can you share a bit more about how to work with tip number 4, rebirthing with each birth? Maybe some specific tips about working with contractive emotions in the moment as a birth worker. How to stay present with the birthing mother and with your own process simultaneously. I love this and it seems challenging. Okay. So I would say like the easiest way to kind of understand that is, as a birth worker, what would you say to a woman who is in the midst of a contraction? What are kind of the tools you would surround her with when she's in the midst of a contraction? If she, you know, the support, the love, the touch, the comfort, breathing, movement, all of these are tools that you all as birth workers can use on yourself. And the more you practice, the more you can actually access them in a birth. So it's much easier to start practicing these tools and understanding what works for you when you're in a situation that's less intense. So just like if you have an argument with someone and you have that like yucky feeling in your body, that like contractive feeling, start to use these tools of pleasure. Again, breath is so simple. Sounding is one of my favorites. Dance, right? The scent, like I have, when you were talking about tools of pleasure, Debra, I have this spray that I just found. It's like an aromatherapy. It smells like fresh roses. And I've been like spritzing it on it. Opens everything up. So this is one of the things that I actually work on in my practitioner training. The training is a 10-month program where I take birth practitioners through every step of how to support an expectant mom, but through the lens of supporting yourselves first. So how do you open up to pleasure? How do you use these tools of pleasure to support yourself so then you can then bring it into the birthing room? And how do you work through the contractions for yourself? How do you integrate pleasure into how you run your practice so you're not so drained? And Debra and I have actually put together an incredible combination package, which we'd love to share with you. And we're going to answer, I see some more comments coming through too, so I'm so excited to read them. But I feel like this is a good moment to share, Debra. Debra has an incredible childbirth education program known as Pain to Power. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? And then I'll talk about the combo.
Pain to Power Childbirth is an online childbirth class that's both for expectant parents, but it's also for birth keepers, because we're also talking about all the different tips and tools that we can integrate in birth so that we can help our clients to find a more safe, satisfying, and pleasurable birth. It is a 10-week or 10-module course. You get access to our documentary, Orgasmic Birth. You get our book, Orgasmic Birth, The Best Kept Secret. And we've partnered with Gail Tully and Spinning Babies. Some of you may know that name. If not, someone to look for. But we have Gail's materials, also her videos and teaching tools within our class, and many others, including some from Sheila. So we've put together what we see as a lot of the best tools that are out there now to prepare for birth and give it to you in 10 weeks, although you have 1 year access to the course. So if you didn't want to do it 1 week at a time, you actually could spread it out longer than that and or come back at any time. And it's going through pregnancy, labor, birth, how to have a gentle and positive cesarean birth, VBAC, all different options in birth, as well as preparing for a sacred and pleasurable baby moon time and postpartum and breastfeeding. So we're really, really excited to partner with you, Sheila, on this, because as we said earlier, I think the combination of what we have, which is kind of childbirth educated, kind of moved into body, mind, spirit, sexuality, and your ability to take a group further, so you share, is an amazing combination offer.
Yeah, and I get asked all the time about like the sort of what are like the basic things that we need? What do you recommend as far as childbirth education? And I'm always referring people to you, because I feel like Debra's course, Debra's book, Debra's movie should just be required materials for any expectant mom. And forget it, like as a birth worker, that should be your resource, because it is the most visionary work on birth and pleasure that's out there. And so I feel really happy partnering also, because I feel like everything that you're offering should be required for anyone working in the birthing field, for anyone giving birth. And so what I do with practitioners is take you over, and I actually just put the links in so you can look at the two courses, you can look at Pain to Power, and you can look at the practitioner training. We do this over the course of 10 months because so much of what I do with practitioners is body practices to allow you to learn the language of the body, which is sensation, because we all numb out. We all ignore our bodies when we're hungry. We all ignore our bodies when we have to pee. That's kind of like our culture to numb out the sensations of our body. So let's start to reconnect to the sensations of your body. Have that connect you to your inner wisdom, which, by the way, is a huge tool for birth. So once you fully embody that, you can share that with your clients, because a woman who is fully connected to the sensations of her body will know how to instinctually move and sound and, flow through her labor and delivery. And then once you're connected to the sensations, how can you expand the pleasure, the sensation of pleasure? How can you find that flow of pleasure within and expand it and use it to support you and nourish you? Because practitioners are like moms, right? You're pouring your love, you're supporting someone else. It's all flowing outward. And there's a level of depletion that happens there that you need to be able to sustain yourself. And pleasure is an incredibly nourishing tool. And so once you start using these tools of pleasure for yourself and you bring them into birth, you're actually not only supporting the expectant mom, you're supporting yourself in that process. And then we also dive into, like, how do you disarm fears? How do you dance with the unexpected on the shadow side of birth? And then finally, like, how do you integrate it into how you run your practice, how you run your birth business? How do you integrate this orientation towards pleasure so that you're getting energy from your work as opposed to being drained by it? So we've put together a package which includes both of these courses, which is actually like less than the combination of each of them individually. And I'll put that info there in just a minute, but I wanted to go through because I've seen a few comments.
Yes, because one of them was, would this fulfill DONA certification? So I just put in that this is not, either Sheila and I, we're not training doulas. So in order to, if you want to become a DONA doula, go to dona.org and you can see many other trainers. But if you'd like to train with me, I just put in my website. That is where I offer doula workshops literally around the world. So you can find me kind of somewhere in the world in the next year for that. But I do want to say that Pain to Power Childbirth does have 18 CEUs from Lamaze International that are accepted by DONA as well. So if you already are a birth keeper and you're looking for continuing education units, then Pain to Power Childbirth will provide those to you.
And my CEUs are pending. I applied for the first time this year. I finally got that application together, which is a bit of a beast, but I'm so excited that I did it because I feel like everyone's always asking me about CEUs. So I'm hoping that'll be something to support birth workers with as well.
Awesome.
Quick question. Oh, that was the question you answered. DONA certification. And then how do I make my husband more comfortable with birth as sexy? I don't want him to be scared to touch me. I also don't want to feel as if I'm forcing him to touch me. I want his help and support. How do I make him more comfortable with this? I mean, I have like a quick answer, and then Debra, you can run with it if you want. But like I always say, watch Debra's movie with your husband and then talk about it. Right? I mean, that's just one way. I find that men are very they need to understand the logic of something more than the emotion of something. So if your husband, you can show him some statistics, you can show him the more you can show him concrete facts and information about why tapping into your sexuality actually leads to better outcomes, the more confident he will feel. Debra, do you have anything that you wanted to say about that?
Well, and I was going to say that too, because I find, and thank you, because I find all the time that partners that see our film, they always come up to me after and they go, wow. And part of it, they say, you just took all my fear away, because I thought I needed a whole new skill set. And I was trying to figure out what I have to learn. And what they see is they just need to love you through labor, and the way that they love you and turn you on and respect you and support you and nurture you are the ways that they're going to bring to birth. And if you're not feeling fully loved and supported in a relationship, then watch the film. And pregnancy is a time to go deeper into that, to really talk about what you need. I also encourage couples to read the 5 languages of love, and each of them to determine which is their love language. and discuss what they need, because we each give and receive love in different languages. And it's just a book that I think is essential for all of us to know in our relationships, but really important for people that are preparing for birth. The other thing I would say is take a childbirth class together that touches on sensuality and sexuality. I have to say I'm the only one I know, but I hope there's more and more childbirth classes that are doing it. But Pain to Power Childbirth online would give you an opportunity to use both visuals that are within it and other materials to really sit and go deeper into a discussion around these issues.
Also, I find that whenever I'm working with a mom that has that similar issue, she'll say, oh, can I bring my husband in for a session? And then she brings her husband in, and her husband, generally, not every man is like this, but generally I find that the husbands just want to please, like they just want to support their women. And so a lot of times it's interesting to see that resistance, it's actually not his resistance, it actually is your resistance to a certain extent. And the more you get right with it, the more he'll get right with it. And I can share for me personally, when I first started learning about this and started sharing it with my husband, I remember we'd be like lying in bed side by side and I'd be like, hey, hon, listen to this. And he would like roll his eyes and be like, that's crazy, right? And now years later, I'm doing this work and we'll be out to dinner with couples and he'll be the first to like educate them and advocate. And I just look at him and I think, okay, he's definitely a mirror of me. Like I was filtering through stuff and trying to understand it. And so he was just, reflecting that back to me. And now that I know unequivocally and I'm taking this path, he has that within himself too. So I would say also start to think about like where your resistances are in relation to birth as a sexual act, and get clear on those so that he can get clear on how he can support you. That's really my husband as well. He now advocates for home birth, so I know that he would also come around to my crazy ideas. There you go. There you go. And Hannah writes, it makes sense to birth with pleasure. Orgasmic contractions are like homeopathy to the body, like waves. Here's like waves of contractions work for labor pains as well as period pains. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm putting in a link now. So this is a link to purchase our products combined. And if you click on it, what you'll see is Pain to Power is, as Debra describes, it's a 10-week course, and it sells for $299. And my practitioner training is a monthly fee of $157, and that adds up to $1,884, which is a total of like over $2,000. So it's a lot of money. We get that. And we want this to be like super accessible and a no-brainer for you all. So we've combined because we feel so strongly that our work is so complementary and is kind of like the total package for anyone that's serious about birthing with pleasure, supporting women in pleasurable birth, and really taking this path. The package of both of our products together is actually less than if you were to combine them. So if you were to buy both of them outright, it's $1,450, or we've put together a payment plan of $195 a month for 8 months. And I know we talked about, Debra, that should only be available for a limited time, but I don't know what kind of time frame do you think? Like by Friday or by Sunday, or what do you think?
I'm willing to give everybody till Sunday, I think.
Okay. That way you can really, there's a lot of information in both of the links for both of the courses. So you can really look at all that information and really digest it and really think about is this for me? Am I really ready to plunge and take this path? Because this is a path that's not for everybody. We get it. And as a birth worker, if you want to be that visionary, that leading edge, it's really very progressive. And, we want people that want to be there, that want to be on that edge and really pushing the boundaries of what's happening in birth and transforming the culture of birth.
And I think it's an amazing offer, an amazing combination. So you're going to get both of us really there for you. As you've been hearing, these are just skimming the surface on some of our tips, and be able to go so much deeper, and you to feel fully supported so that you can birth this forward in your own life and to all those people that you're going to touch. So I'm so honored to do this with you, Sheila, and just so appreciate that we can combine and make the price something that's reachable on a monthly level.
And this is, we did this last year for the first time, and the group of practitioners that I'm working with, they're just finishing up right now. But I have to say, the group that did the combo package of Debra and I were like the most engaged, the most like they rocked this course and are like raring to go out there and to do this work in a really big way. So I feel great that those of you that say yes to this, it's a wonderful path. I see we have another question. How would you support a client during labor whose healthcare provider does not appear supportive of sexuality without seeming like you're going against the care provider? Do you want me to take a shot at that, or do you want to?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, I would say in the moment, it can be really tricky. And that's the sort of thing that if you work with clients ahead of their births, that's something that you would want to explore and discuss and have her speak to her healthcare provider about if she thinks she does want to use tools of sexuality. I usually have my moms talk to their healthcare providers about that, because then you can really get a sense of like, am I working with the right healthcare provider? Is this the person to support me in my desires or not? I think in the moment it can be really tricky. So one of the ways I get around it, if someone's committed to a healthcare provider but also wants to tap into these tools, is use tools that don't seem outright sexual but can help you tap into your sexuality. Like sounding is my absolute favorite, because everyone expects a birthing woman to make sound. Everyone expects a birthing woman to moan and be loud and all that. Sounding is actually such a powerful sensual and sexual expansion tool. So when you're moaning with the intention of expanding the energy in your pelvis and feeling more pleasure in your feminine center, you can use that in birth. You can teach that to your clients. You can learn. I do this with my practitioners in the training. I teach you how to do that. And then you can have your clients moan like that. You can have them repeat after you and moaning in a way that really helps them feel into their pleasure and their sexual center. And it doesn't appear outright sexual to the other people in the room who might not be comfortable with that. Do you have anything that you wanted to share about that, Debra?
Everything you said, I completely agree with. I would add that I sometimes, especially when I'm a doula with people, if I know that their relationship is safe together and that this would be okay, I tell partners, start kissing, as Ida Mae Gaskin would say, smooching, right? And I find that when you start kissing, it just shuts everybody up and often clears the room. I've had providers kind of walk out and go like, I was trying to talk to them and they just kept kissing. And I'll step out of the room too. And I always have to giggle. And I'm like, I'll say to the caregiver, well, isn't that wonderful? I mean, isn't that what we're looking for, is getting that oxytocin going? And I've had doctors kind of look at me like, I never really thought about that. And, this is a huge gap in our medical training. We need to really step back. Someone brought it into education, right, with high school students. I couldn't agree more. This should be just basic education for everyone, but we really need to also start with medical caregivers so that they know this is normal. But sometimes simple ways. I love the toning. I would add kissing, stroking. Sometimes if you're willing to be a little bit bold and like lead in that direction, don't worry. If you make people uncomfortable, but you're not doing it with negativity, you're doing it with love, literally. If they step out of the room, that's their issue, not yours.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to actually share something you were talking about, starting in high school and the need for that. So I was actually speaking at a local high school here and about pleasurable birth. I have a friend who's a health teacher there, and she asked me to come in and share. And the first thing I did was put up a diagram of the clitoris, like the outline of the clitoris, the entire anatomy of the clitoris. And I asked them if anybody knew what it was. And they didn't. Nobody had any idea. So these are like 16, 17-year-olds. It was a room full of girls and one boy. And then I asked them, well, how many of you have learned how to put on a condom? And they all raised their hands. So that's just reflective of like, even though we've come a long way, we still haven't really come very far. And if you go back to like when we were getting our education as kids, there is a gap. And I agree with Debra. There is like a huge gap in our own sexual education. And I can't even tell you how many women that go through my course, I lean into the wisdom of Sherry Winston, who is an incredible, she used to be a midwife and now she's a sexual educator and has written an award-winning book called Women's Anatomy of Arousal, where she really goes through the female anatomy and talks about it as it relates to birth. I can't tell you how many of the people that go through my course say, oh my God, I just learned more about my body than I knew was possible my whole life. And as I say that, everything's bringing all around me, but there's so much that we don't know. And if you Google Huffington Post cliteracy, they've taken on this movement of like educating about the clitoris. And if you look at the first page they have is something like, you know, in 1950 something, we put a man on the moon. And in 1990, whatever, we learned the full anatomy of the clitoris. And there's still stuff coming up as recently as like 2008, more information is coming up about the anatomy of the clitoris. And the thing that's so relevant to birth is it's not just, you know, it's not just like a bonus, maybe, you know, you'll have pleasure or you won't. But actually, if you look at the anatomy of the clitoris, it goes all around the birth canal. And part of that is pain management, as I know some researchers have talked about. But it's also not just pain management; it's also pleasure. It's all right there. We just need to open our minds to that. It's integrated into our bodies, into our sexuality. We've really been closed off from that for a long time. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to share, Debra? I'm seeing a lot of really nice comments, gratitude.
Well, there is
so nice to have so many.
Are these primarily recorded online trainings? Are there live webinars and person-to-person contact as well?
Do you want to talk about your piece first? And
then you'll do it. So my piece is all pre-recorded. So you are getting things that all do exist. We do have a private Facebook group that everyone that's taking the course at that time is invited into, and you do get 24/7 doula support. So your questions will be answered by me or my pleasure coordinator, Megan, who also is a wonderful doula as well. So that's really predominantly where our kind of contact with you will come.
Okay. And then for my course, the modules are all recorded, but we have a gathering once a month online live where we do discuss everything that we've learned and where we do body practices together. So you're getting a combination of audio recordings, video recordings, practices that you do on your own, and then that monthly live gathering where we really connect as a community. And as Debra shared also, I have a Facebook group where we discuss online as well. All right, doesn't look like we have any other questions. So I think this is it. I'm just so grateful, Debra, for your friendship and for your collaboration in this.
Oh, thank you, Sheila. It's mutual. It's truly a pleasure working with you, sharing with you. And this was so much fun. I can see it looks like people enjoyed it. Thank you for being here with us. And thank you for all you're doing, Sheila. Your voice is really shining a light and helping all of us really open to our own pleasure and then birth it forward. Thank you.
Oh, same. You've created so many amazing ripples with your work, with your film, with your book. So I'm just following the light, the torch that you're holding up high. Thank you. And so, yeah, I think you all can sense Debra and I could really talk about this for like hours and hours and hours and hours. And we do in our own way in different places. But hopefully those of you that are feeling called will join us and you can spend the next year really immersing in pleasurable birth, expanding your sensuality, expanding your sexuality, and bringing that into the birthing room and to your clients as well. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for all the love in the chat box. I'm enjoying reading that. And thank you for being here today. So from both of us, lots of love. We'll be in touch with some follow-up emails, the recording for those that didn't make it. If you want to share the recording with other people in your networks, you're more than welcome to do that. And our combined offer will be available until Sunday then. So we'll send you a few reminders about that too. But if you're feeling called, we would love to have you join us. Oh, thank you for blowing kisses. That's fun.
Yeah. And I have to just give a shout out. I see you there, London. I miss you. You have to shoot me a note.
Wait, go. Okay. I'm so sorry I missed. I just walked in. I love you so much. Hi, Sheila. I love you guys. I'm getting back. These kids are awesome here. I love what you're doing. I love you. I love you. I love you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Shoot me an email, London.